There was $1 trillion of Liberal debt in a budget weighed down with waste and rorts. The cumulative lost output between now and mid-century is $4 trillion. The deficit for this year is now $1.3 billion smaller. The budget position over the 4 years is $27.1 billion better.
So many numbers.
$14.6 billion in savings, bringing to a total $92 billion since PFO.
Keeping up? Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Finance Minister Katie Gallagher have been hitting us with a veritable wall of numbers of late. What many pundits will question, though, is whether astronomical numbers in the billions and trillions make any real impact on voters for whom such figures remain beyond any meaningful point of comparison. The underlying trends in the budget are easier to grasp. The amount of tax and other payments the federal government is collecting as a proportion of the economy went up during the pandemic and has continued to nudge higher ever since. The amount of government spending as a proportion of the economy peaked in the pandemic and, after falling briefly, has crept up again. Both figures reflect the fact that the size of government is growing, particularly as a result of the growth of the care economy. But as the year ends, one of the issues that isn't really being debated by our political leaders is whether this change is something we just have to get used to. Labor talks about responsible spending.
Firstly, we've made a lot of progress when it comes to repairing the budget that we inherited, but we need more than a term to finish the job because a $200 billion turnaround is the biggest ever on record in nominal terms, but we know that there's still debt in the budget.
The Coalition's headline response is that all the government spending isn't responsible and implies it would cut it.
We've been clear that there are areas where we see real potential for savings. In fact, we've opposed, through this term of Parliament, over $110 billion of spending initiatives.
But while it has now outlined its $300 billion plus of nuclear power spending plans, it is more reluctant to say what spending it might cut. On 7:30 last night, Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor said the opposition didn't like last week's announcement of $427 million of extra spending, which will allow parents who aren't working to get access to childcare. But it would support $1 billion of extra spending on building extra childcare centres. Asked about health spending on things like cancer treatments, nurses and subsidised medicine, he swerved a little.
Well, we've been clear, we're not interested in cutting essential services in health. We've been clear about that, but we have been clear that adding $5 billion a year in expense in Canberra-based bureaucracy is not appropriate at a time like this.
Voters are likely to have a more immediate interest in the other half of the mid-year review, the forecasts of where the economy is going. And that puts a slightly different complexion on the big spending public sector. MyEFO, as it is known, describes an economy propped up by public sector spending and by migration, which is still running at a much higher rate than the government forecast.
People have asked me in the course of today, should we have and could we have cut harder in the budget? And the answer to that is we could have, but we shouldn't have. And that's because the economy is quite soft and people are under very substantial pressure.
MyEFO tells us households will spend about as much this financial year as they did last year, instead of double that, as had been forecast in May. Business will also be weak. These are hardly fabulous conditions in which any government would want to hold an election, an event which looms ever closer. Some in the Labor camp still believe the PM could call an election for as early as February. Others think he might wait as long as May. Despite all the prognostications, there's only a couple of months in it. Either way, Anthony Albanese will be the only elected first-term Prime Minister since the Second World War to go full term. Whatever else happens in 2025, we will find out if being an outlier was a good or bad idea.